All right, thank you, Amanda and Brynn. That was Amanda and Katie. That was really good. Appreciate your thoughts. The Write It Right is always a good reminder of what not to put in. We don't have anything that jarring as an example, but certainly we have some tapping into FDA, some regulatory hot topics. We're focused today on FDA, a changing FDA. I have Brynn and Rebecca with me, and I'll introduce ourselves shortly, but we're really excited to have a conversation about how we approach FDA and what we've seen. So I'm Nate Downing. I'm a managing attorney with Gardner. I've been here about 4 years. I advise clients on a variety of FDA, some compliance considerations, anything from product development, submission, advertising, promotional work, and all the issues that come with that.
Hello, I'm Rebecca Zadaka. I'm an associate attorney at Gardner Law. I've been here for a little over 2 years. I work primarily in the regulatory group, mainly supporting some ad promo, but I also help out with some clients' matters as well.
And I'm Brynn Stanley, and I've been with Gardner Law for about 5 years now. I work in the regulatory group, and I focus mainly on regulatory and quality. And I do a lot of clinical trial work as well.
Thank you. So we are going to have time at the end for questions. So if you have any questions, feel free. But like Amanda said, we are going to be around, so feel free to grab us. But today we're focused on a changing FDA and some types of changes, right, that you'll see in some conversations we'll have. One of them being staffing changes, right? That's been pretty prominent in the news. Staffing changes, who's been let go, who's been brought back, what are the impacts? I'll give a quick kind of my own experience from even this morning. I was on a call with FDA. It was part of a submission issue, so an SIR meeting. And typically, I know it says you get to choose either feedback or written feedback, or either a meeting or written feedback. And it's oftentimes you'll get both, right? I think it better prepares the meeting. It sets the stage. We got on the call with FDA, and we noted, hey, we did not actually receive anything. And they were like, well, we didn't have time. And it was actually impactful to the meeting because the issues they wanted to discuss were different than those that we had prepared for, essentially. And so there was an impact to the meeting today. And I think that that's also kind of a ongoing theme, right? I haven't really seen great misses on MDUFA, but some of the more quote-unquote optional touch points may be going away due to some of the staffing issues. And as an industry partner, right, those are amazing opportunities for us to get in front of FDA, and losing those, I think, hurts FDA efficiency, not helps FDA efficiency. So, that's just kind of one story among many, but that's part of the thread, a theme that we'll be threading through policy updates, right? There's still a lot to come. There's been a lot of executive orders, other documents about regulation, reducing regulation, deregulation. So what does that mean? Brynn's going to get into some of that. But just kind of a high-level overview of there are policy updates coming. There may be some already that you've seen, but it's a way to keep watching, and you need to keep aware of what those might be. Enforcement pursuits. Enforcement is always an area of everyone's concern, right? It creates a lot of time and money. Even if that enforcement turns out in your favor, it's still an impact. And so inspections, Brynn's going to get into that. Advertising, Rebecca will touch on that, of what might this current FDA administration do. And then enforcement light. I see a lot of times where FDA will kind of reach out, and to them it's informal. Like I call it enforcement light. They're not really mandating something because they can't per their process. They haven't done enough to do so, but it's still disruptive, and it's a way for them to try to get a message across. And so as industry, really making sure we hold FDA to, they have standards. If they want to take action, they need to meet those standards. And so kind of paying attention. Might there be different types of enforcement light, as I call it, that comes through, and maybe that thread will come out. So before I really get into it with Rebecca and Brynn, thinking about how to approach a changing FDA, your overall approach and your regulatory strategy, right? You have to think about your inability to maybe have some of these unofficial touch points, right? The timing. Could there be impacts to timing as staffing reductions make more of an impact given the time from when maybe a lot of submissions were already in process? And so keeping an eye on that. Maintaining audit readiness. Foreign inspections. I think Brynn is really going to give us some great insight into that. And so understanding that just because some staff has been let go, it doesn't mean they're not going to be showing up or showing up virtually. Promotional material, having a keen eye, understanding what this administration under the HHS secretary, what they might focus on, right? And so, having a buttoned up area in your promotional review and making sure you understand the risk properly and are, attending to those risks. And finally, adapting to FDA. Part of this conversation will be, hey, here's some things that are coming. And the bottom line is you need to be adaptive, right? Our goal is to get on market, to be compliant, and understanding what FDA is going to do before it actually impacts us is important to being able to adapt. And so getting kicked off, I want to first turn to Rebecca. There's been some proposed changes to GRAS and food ingredient regulation. Currently, if a food ingredient is added to food, it's food additive unless it's considered generally recognized as safe or GRAS. And so, Rebecca, tell us how this system works and a little bit more about what's going on.
Yeah, so this whole GRAS system has actually been around for quite a while, but a lot of consumers don't actually realize how these food ingredients are regulated. So as Nate said, food ingredients, if it's added to food, is considered to be a food additive unless it can fit one of these kind of carve-out definitions. One of them is GRAS, or generally recognized as safe. And these GRAS ingredients, they include some ingredients, that have been on the market pre-1958. Think like sodium nitrate in luncheon meats. Those have been around a long time. We know them to be safe. But what about a new ingredient that we think is generally recognized as safe as well? So some of these ingredients, like carrageenan, is considered one of the newer GRAS ingredients. The way it works essentially is a manufacturer can essentially self-determine, it's called a self-affirmation process. They can decide on their own that an ingredient is generally recognized as safe. They are supposed to, use public data, qualified experts. It's supposed to be public knowledge that it is generally recognized as safe. And they have an optional way to notify FDA. FDA can question it, say they don't agree, but this is all optional. So a lot of manufacturers will just do this self-affirmation process. And later, if FDA does question an ingredient, they have been known to say, actually, we don't think so. For example, terra flour is an ingredient that was determined to be GRAS, and FDA later said, actually, the data doesn't support this. And so it was removed from that designation. So there are some benefits to the system in that, if manufacturers are doing things the way they should be, in theory, there's a lot of opportunity for innovation, get new food ingredients out there. There's a lot of new plant-based meats. They've come on the market quickly. If they did have to go through FDA approval, that would obviously slow down this innovative process. But there are, some question marks here. There isn't always a good lack of transparency. There could be some conflicts of interest here. So there have been some proposed changes to this system. There's nothing solid as of yet, but some of the proposals have centered around making this optional notification process no longer optional. So that would mean manufacturers would always have to basically tell FDA, here's our new ingredient, we think it's GRAS, here's why. And then FDA would have to review all of them and say yes or no, essentially. There haven't been any, suggestions as to how FDA would staff this. That would be a significant increase in review that FDA would need to take on, as Nate was alluding to, how would this work? We don't know yet. There's still a lot up in the air, but that's a potential to happen in the near future.
Thank you, Rebecca. So now I'm going to turn to Brynn, and this is something, too, that's really been in the news quite a bit on FDA inspections. The FDA is intensifying unannounced foreign inspection efforts, despite even the recent staffing reductions. Manufacturers are advised to improve their global readiness by strengthening their compliance through mock inspections, updating training protocols, and review of documentation and quality management systems. Brynn, what operational changes can manufacturers implement now to reduce the risk during these FDA's expanded foreign inspections?
Yeah, so, and before I jump to answering the question, just a little background. Some of this started during the COVID-19 pandemic. The FDA was noticing, or previously foreign inspections, manufacturers were getting more notice for inspections versus domestic manufacturers, which typically would see the unannounced inspection. So there was a little bit of a unfair advantage is what kind of some of the thought process was behind that. And then some of the COVID-19 pandemic disruptions and inspections, there's just been a backlog. So part of why this is coming on now is to clear up some of that and then also kind of level the playing field. So what manufacturers should be doing now, and it is something that manufacturers should always be doing, which is making sure they have running a compliant manufacturing facility. But what we are encouraging manufacturers to do is to take a look at for domestic manufacturers, take a look at their supply chain and see kind of, if they have foreign manufacturers also involved, because they might be impacted by these inspections as well. So this isn't just isolated to foreign manufacturers, but aside from that, so clearing up your supply chain, making sure you're doing those supplier audits, making sure your foreign suppliers are ready. From a foreign manufacturer standpoint, what you should be doing is taking a look through all your records, doing mock inspections, planning your facility for a FDA auditor to show up, or inspector rather. So it is part of a compliant quality management system to have your internal audit procedures ready, but it is often sometimes one of the more overlooked portions of folks' operations. So we are kind of emphasizing that manufacturers should really step that up and make sure that their internal audits are on time and have been implemented, and any corrective actions that they needed to put in place have taken place. So we might see the FDA, you might see them anytime. So I really do think this is one of those areas they are going to emphasize. So
Yeah, thank you, Brynn. I mean, it's an area too where when it happens, if it goes well, you feel great.
Yep.
You're flying high. If it goes poorly, major impacts to business, major impacts to a lot of the ways you move
Yes.
forward. It's an important area to be aware of. So now we're going to move into some questions to Rebecca again about ad promo updates. And I think something recently interesting that happened that Rebecca will touch in, but to me, I'm in a lot of meetings, and maybe a marketing VP is putting together an HCP facing piece. And it's kind of like, well, what's the risk, right? I mean, that's the question I get a lot. And it's not my favorite question, because I usually say, well, the risk of what? Getting caught? Because you're not complying, I don't give you the risk of getting caught. But it is interesting to see some recent development on where maybe FDA is starting to go as well. So despite all the recent changes at FDA, there have still been 3 entitled letters in 2025. Rebecca, what has FDA enforcement looked like recently related to the warning or entitled letters?
Yeah, so as Nate just touched upon, they are still active. There have been 3 untitled letters so far in 2025, and what's interesting is they've been on a variety of materials. As Nate alluded to, one was actually a speaker deck presentation that was aimed at a healthcare professional or HCP audience. Another was the efficacy page on a website for another drug, and another was actually an exhibit booth panel. So all sorts of areas that FDA is looking into. And, it is a little bit less common that FDA would go after something that is HCP facing. Typically, they're more concerned with the consumer material, because consumers could be a little more easily misled. They don't always have all the right background material or context to analyze claims from. So this one was a little bit of an interesting letter. It was pretty long compared to other letters, and it appeared, that FDA, this was not their first time to let this manufacturer know of some issues they had with some of their claims and marketing material. To add insult to injury, this was a black box warning drug, meaning it does have higher risks to consumers. The letter called out several times where there were claims that the active ingredient was superior to others on the market when the data that was cited didn't actually support this. Risks were mitigated, efficacy was overplayed. All the while, they had loads of citations for all of these claims, but FDA really dove into them and said, no, this data does not support this claim. And the reason I think it's so important that FDA did this is because an HCP who is receiving this information and they can see, oh, look, there's citations, they're more likely to just believe it, even if they say, hey, this claim actually contradicts with the PI, that's the prescribing information, that's interesting, the manufacturer's telling me this. And so they might prescribe the drug to a patient that's not appropriate or increases risk to patients. So it's really important that they are speaking accurately to these HCPs. So FDA is really looking at all of that, and it's different and it's important, and you need to be ready for any material to potentially come under target from FDA. So far we've seen in 2025, all types of material have been targeted. Something I do expect, I don't know for sure, but judging off of 2024, there were a couple of untitled letters relating to material that was on social media. I would not be surprised if we saw more this year on that, considering a lot of manufacturers are now putting different material on social media like LinkedIn. That is actually a kind of a little bit of a more dangerous place given the nature of social media. There isn't as much space or time to put everything that you would normally put with some sort of marketing material. There are a lot of other people looking at it. I've seen several, companies write complaint letters to other companies or to FDA for material that stems from something on social media such as LinkedIn. So it is important to make sure all of your material is always compliant. Don't assume FDA is not looking, because if they're not, a competitor might.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. Ad promo is such a important area from a company standpoint, right? This is how you promote your product, but it's where everything is seen by whomever, competitors, FDA. It's very permanent, right? We have programs embedded in our quality systems to claw back material that may be non-compliant, but we all know once it's out there, it's out there. So making sure that first pass is thorough and you've got the right eyes on it is important. So now we're going to move to something that's really, in this administration, a hot topic. And I think, it's things that can sound good to industry, but also can be a little scary to industry. So we're going to move on to deregulation. And I'm going to ask Brynn about this. So HHS and the FDA issued a request for information seeking public input on which regulations could be modified or eliminated to lower healthcare costs and reduce administrative burdens. Under the directive, HHS must eliminate 10 regulations for every new one, reduce overall regulatory costs below zero in FY 2025, and broaden oversight to include informal policies and publish annual reports to enhance transparency. Brynn, what are the potential impacts that this may have on manufacturers?
Yeah, so as Nate was mentioning, this administration has this is one of the things that they're emphasizing to really kind of cut the red tape, I think is one of the quotes that was put out there. And this was, Trump had an executive order similar to this in his first term, but it was a 2-for-1. So this is really kind of driving it home. So now it's, instead of getting rid of 2 regulations, we're getting rid of 10 for every new one added. So it's kind of the first administration's executive order, and then I guess literally turned up to 10. So, but what the thing that can really impact manufacturers here, there's kind of a variety of things, but mainly it's kind of be flexible. You really should have kind of your regulatory team taking a look constantly, I guess, at the FDA for updates. There might be a lot of changes coming through. It's kind of really difficult to tell right now. An important piece about this is that manufacturers do have a little bit of say. So I do encourage manufacturers to go in, make those comments during this public comment period. I believe there's 60 days, and I believe it started May 13th. So there's still time to go in there and make those comments. I know that, I have worked for manufacturers in the past, and I know there are a lot of certain regulations that a lot of them just would rather not follow. And some of them are really overly burdensome. So this is the opportunity for manufacturers to really kind of potentially influence that and make things more streamlined for those types of regulations that just aren't necessary. The other piece, what was I gonna shift on? As kind of these changes start rolling out, the other piece is to just watch out for those new regulations and make sure that you are staying compliant with those as they come rolling out. So there might be new guidances, new regulations. It's not exactly clear what the 1 for 10 rule means. How are we defining what 1 for 10 is? So I think it's just a good opportunity to be flexible and be optimistic, as we do have opportunity. There is an opportunity for the public manufacturers to kind of drive some of these processes.
Yeah, thanks, Brynn. And I think it's important too, as Brynn was alluding to, like regulation. It's the world we live in, right? And so sometimes regulations can be annoying, but they also can provide predictability. And so you have to think about: are you able to follow this? Can you meet it? Is it a standard? What happens to competitors if I'm already able to meet something and I just, maybe whatever reason is, I try to advocate to remove a regulation, and now it opens up the floodgates for others who didn't meet the standard that I met, right? And so, regulation's good and bad. And the point of me saying this is kind of the eye that I would take to this is, okay, is this truly a burdensome regulation? If so, is there any benefit to? Is there ways to shape it instead of remove it? May not always fit the 10-to-1, but there's going to be a lot of kind of back and forth, and this is the time to get those comments out and be heard. So I appreciate Brynn for that message. So we're going to go back to advertising because, as you read, this is where a lot of companies stumble. It's where when you get a letter from FDA, whether it's come to our attention, it's untitled, it's more, or I've seen it where FDA simply asks a question to a regulatory leader at a company and says, hey, can you tell me more about that claim? The wheels start turning at a company. The money starts getting spent to respond, and the resources start being utilized to make sure that things are up to date. So it's a really important, really high gain, but high loss area. And so we're going to turn back to Rebecca for another kind of question on direct-to-consumer, DTC advertising. So Secretary RFK has suggested banning direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical ads from TV, which has sparked some debate. What are the main reasons for supporting this ban, Rebecca?
Yeah, thanks, Nate. And, this kind of factors into what we were talking about a little earlier with the HCP deck. So FDA is, concerned, and there are other people who are concerned about the potentially misleading nature of advertising to consumers. We've all, seen these pharmaceutical ads on TV sometimes. Some are, a little more out there than others. We're all aware of, these ads, and then they mention all these risks at the end. And the idea is that consumers are going to be involved in their healthcare. They can see these ads and say like, oh, I think this might apply to me. Talk to their doctor. There are risks of it. RFK has mentioned he's worried about overprescribing. Maybe a consumer hears this drug and then goes and talks to their doctor, and their doctor is a little more inclined to prescribe this drug because the consumer wants it, and they're, all right, your patient wants it, but maybe that isn't the initial path they might have taken, but now they're kind of influenced, or they might change direction. Ideally, they wouldn't, but who knows, that it could happen. It's, data has shown that pharmaceutical industry's rate of return on these ads is actually tremendous. It's a very good economic situation for them. It would certainly be harmful to them to no longer be able to advertise direct to consumer on TV. It could be really difficult to do a ban. I mean, there was recent a case surrounding putting the wholesale price of drugs on TV ads, and it was struck down. There was a First Amendment claim to commercial speech in there that the court did not address. Ultimately, they said there wasn't authority to have that wholesale acquisition price on these ads. So there could be a lot of hurdles to banning it. I think what's more likely is maybe we'll see a little more restrictions, a little more regulation, maybe acting with the deregulation, who knows. But it certainly is brought to the table that this could be problematic. So only time will tell what will happen with that, but it could be a difficult one to implement.
Thank you. Quick comment on that, direct-to-consumer advertising is unique in the U.S., but it's also important, right? There's a lot of litigation from a malpractice standpoint. And so in a lot of ways, patients advocate for themselves, right? Oftentimes you'll hear a physician say, well, you choose the path, right? Like, what do you want to do? And so there is a lot of message that gets out. And so also that's why the U.S. is such a unique space in that we've got a lot of DTC advertising, but we also have a lot of patient advocacy. And so, there's an offset there, and right, we'll see where everyone settles, but it's certainly something to keep an eye on, to more reason just to keep that direct-to-consumer advertising, closely reviewed and compliant. So we got one last question that I want to ask Brynn, and this is something recent that's come up, but also a very interesting FDA hot topic. AI-assisted scientific review pilot. So, Brynn, earlier this month, the FDA announced completion of its first pilot using AI, or artificial intelligence, to assist in scientific review. The agency plans an aggressive expansion of AI use across all FDA centers, really in the end of the next month, by June 30th, 2025. How might this change the review process?
So I did want to just lead with, if I would have given this presentation a month ago when this came out, it would have been a very different presentation. I was very much an AI skeptic. I know it's wrong a lot of the time, and I was like, this is going to be a disaster. I do think that it is not nearly as disastrous now that I've kind of looked into this a little bit more, and I've used AI more myself just to kind of get a better feel for it. But so I think that there are potential downfalls for it, but I think that it's not necessarily going to be the disaster I first thought it was. So it does still feel like a pretty aggressive timeline. By the end of June, it's going to be across all centers. So manufacturers do need to prepare starting now, especially if they have submissions coming up. Kind of the main thing for manufacturers to consider is AI is going to be kind of the first set of eyes, so to speak, on their submissions. So you need to kind of develop your submissions in a way that is machine learnable. So knowing that it's going to be in there, making sure all your tables are formatted appropriately, that your wording is consistent, just kind of any of the tools that you would normally use to kind of teach your own AI when you're kind of doing your own searches. Make sure that you're kind of keeping that in mind as you're developing your submissions, just to make sure that it's not getting flagged for something kind of silly whereas it normally, a human probably would have caught that. But that being said, knowing that there are some staffing shortages at the FDA, I did have AI actually develop a little pros and cons list just to kind of end this piece. So the pros are that it can speed up the scientific data review, and I think I agree with that. That makes sense. Enhance consistency and reduces human error. Yes. Frees up reviewers' time. And that is one of the frees up the reviewers' time is one of the pieces that the FDA has enforced as part of their announcement. And then improve scalability. So that might be a bonus for manufacturers. We might be able to get through these things faster. The cons are requiring sponsors to submit highly structured, machine-readable data, which we talked about. Introducing concerns about transparency and interpretability of AI tools, and the initial adjustment period needed for reviewers and sponsors. So I think I agree with all those, and I think AI might be right on those too. So.
All right, thank you, Brynn. Time for a couple of questions just in closing. Some key takeaways. First, AI has Brynn's stamp of approval, so that is important. Congrats to AI. But remember, FDA is changing right now, and you really need to be aware and adaptive. And because some of the changing isn't something that I can foresee right now, right? You don't always know the impacts, like I said this morning, of a meeting where the interaction with FDA was slightly different than it would have been a year ago. And so accounting for that, trying to reach out earlier, trying to do different things to offset some things that may have been lost, but also take advantage of the opportunities. The deregulation is a really important industry aspect that if we can take advantage and you can make some change that better still protects the public but gets your device out or allows you a better, more clear path to market, that's an important change. So in the next 50 days or whatever is left, taking advantage of that comment period. But, making sure no matter what, you pay attention to FDA and you be adaptive as industry and continue to try to partner with FDA as best you can is extremely important. So we have 3 seconds, so if there's any questions, happy to take them. All right, thank you. We're going to take got an in question. Let me bring a microphone to you.
Hi, I had 2 questions, but I'll just start with one because I think it was almost partially answered with the AI-assisted scientific review pilot. So it sounds like the FDA is trying to leverage AI in order to expand efficiency and reduce their staffing, because my concern was that with less staff, how can the FDA actually do the work that they need to do? So do you see the FDA in the future, hopefully, kind of getting back to the status quo of the amount of work they're able to do with less staff because they will be AI assisted in the future?
I think it could really go either way. So if they're short-staffed and now we're flooding them with submissions, yes, we can get through that initial period, but now we have a backlog. So I feel like it probably will eventually balance out, and they may, depending, I guess, on what happens and how this pilot rolls out, it could even go the other way where they start needing to hiring staff back because we are quicker now. But we probably won't be quicker on the human part. That's probably still necessary.
That makes sense. And really quickly, my last question, the request for information. So my sense is in the past, the FDA would ask for this from the public, but not really act upon it. I'm not sure if that's due to potential previous administrations, maybe not having the same focus on efficiency and monetary efficiency, I guess, as this administration. Do you see a significant difference where there may be acting more upon public comment based on?
Yeah, I do think that that's the opportunity why it's so highlighted is there's an opportunity that FDA will act upon some of this. I'll come grab the microphone from you. And so because of this administration's kind of open willingness to deregulate, if you will, I think this is a key for them to find regulations that industry can be happy, and it's obviously much easier to push through certain deregulations when you have an industry partner who's advocating for it.
I have a quick question. Did the FDA provide any assurances around where the data are going? Is it like walled off from the world, or I don't know, like if you're a device maker or a drug maker, is there some sort of assurance that your data isn't going to find its way into the public domain once you put it into the machine?
I couldn't actually find any information really on exactly what the AI was doing, which is, that's where the Brynn skeptic comes in. But I couldn't find information necessarily like on how they were validating the program, what they did exactly. Just information on this announcement is pretty much all I could find so far. So.
Thank you. We are going to turn it over to David.